Hi beauties, Rosy here from rosypena.com, a fashion, sewing, and lifestyle blog. Welcome back to my channel. I am so excited that you're here. So in today's video, we're going to be working on another episode of Sewing with Rosy. I really hope you are enjoying these sew along type videos. Today's episode, we're going to be making McCall's 7977, which is this really beautiful and feminine top. And we're going to be making view C of the pattern, but we're going to be adding the really cool flounce that is added to the inset on the front. The fabric that you want to choose for this pattern is some kind of lightweight shawly, a crepe, something that is going to be really drapey and flowy. The suggested fabrics on the back are cotton blends, dobby, lawn, crepe de chine. You can also play around with some really cool color blocking with this pattern, but we're going to be using this really beautiful solid floral print fabric. So go ahead and grab your fabric and your pattern and we can go ahead and get started. Alright you guys, in today's video we're going to be working on McCall's 7977. The fabric that I'm going to be using in today's video is this really gorgeous floral print fabric from fabric.com. You'll also need some interfacing. You're going to also need a 1/2 inch single fold bias tape and a 1/4 inch elastic, and also 1/2 inch button. As always, you'll want to fold your fabric with right sides together and the selvage edges meeting. The selvage edge is just the finished edge of the fabric. The pattern pieces that we're going to need in today's video are pattern piece number 1, which is your front, and this is cut on the fold. Make sure you transfer all of those markings on your pattern piece. Next, you're going to need pattern piece number 2, which is your ruffle. You're going to need 2 of these. You're also going to need pattern piece number 3, which is your front yoke, and this is cut also on the fold. You're also going to need pattern piece number 4, which is your back, and this is cut on the fold as well. Make sure you transfer all of your markings. You also need pattern piece number 5, which is your front neckband, and this is cut on the fold. These are the pieces that are going to need to be interfaced. If you'd like a more detailed video on interfacing, let me know in the comments bar below. You're also going to need pattern piece number 6, which is your back neckband, and this is cut 2 times. We're also going to need pattern piece number 9, which is your sleeve, and of course you'll need 2 of these. Make sure you transfer all of those markings. Now we'll go ahead and work on the sewing steps. So the very first step that we're going to need to do is to reinforce that V neck on pattern piece number 1, which is your front. You just want to sew along that V marking using a short stitch length. Next, you're going to fold your ruffle pieces with right sides together and you're going to pin all the way up until that dot marking that you made. Now with our back piece folded right sides together, we're going to cut out that keyhole at the markings on the pattern. So I'm just going to go ahead and place my pattern onto my fabric, and I'm just going to use those markings and go ahead and just cut out the keyhole shape. Then I'm just going to open up my fabric and I'm going to use my scissors to snip the rest of that keyhole open. Now we're going to grab our interfaced neckband pieces and we're going to place the back to the front with right sides facing, and we're going to pin along those short shoulder seams. Once you've sewn your ruffle piece together with right sides facing, stopping at that dot, you just want to go ahead and press that seam open. I also went ahead and sewed the shoulder seams of the front and back neckband together with right sides facing. Make sure you did your stay stitching along the front V-neck and also clip to that small dot. Also want to make sure you stay stitch around that keyhole opening. Next, we're just going to take our ruffle piece and we're going to hem the outer edge and also the short side edges as well. You want to turn your serged edge onto itself, and then you're just going to repeat that step one more time to encase that serged edge. This is just an easier method to do your hemming, using that serged edge as your hem guide. Once you've turned those outer edges to the inside and you've pinned in place, you just want to sew very close to that turned in edge. This is going to finish off your hems of your ruffle. Some of the sewing footage in these earlier steps accidentally got deleted, but if you guys have questions about these earlier sewing steps, let me know in the comments below and I will answer them the best that I can. Now we're going to finish that keyhole opening with bias tape. You're just going to place your bias tape with right sides together along that keyhole opening, and you're just going to pin that in place, matching the crease of the bias tape to the seam line of the keyhole opening. The way that I finished the keyhole opening is by stitching along the crease line of the bias tape, and then I trimmed that seam allowance down to about 1/4 inch. Then I folded the bias tape to the wrong side of the fabric, encasing that seam that we just sewed. Then you just want to stitch very close to the creased edge of the bias tape. This is going to neatly finish your keyhole opening. You should have finished the hem edges of the ruffle in an earlier step. Once you've done that, you're going to take your ruffle to your sewing machine and you're going to create a gathering stitch along the inner edge of the ruffle. this side is going to be sewn to the garment. The way that I like to create gathers is by using a basting stitch on my machine and then turning the tension dial to the highest setting. This is kind of a quicker and easier method for gathering your fabric. If you guys would like more information on how to gather fabric, I'll have a blog post linked in the description bar below. Now you want to have your front bodice with the right sides facing up and your ruffle with the right sides facing up. Then you're going to pin the ruffle to the neckline of the front. Go ahead and just pin that in place along the gathered edge and the front V neckline, making sure to match the dot of the ruffle to the dot of the shoulder seam. So the ruffle is pinned 5/8 of an inch away from the very raw edge of the shoulder. Now you're going to take your fabric to your sewing machine and you're going to baste the ruffle to the front neckline. The basting stitch is just the longest stitch setting on your machine. This is a temporary stitch. Once you've basted the ruffle in place, we're going to take our front yoke and we're going to pin that with right sides together along that V neck. I'm going to start at the point of the yoke and the point of the neckline, and then I'm just going to pin that in place. Once I've sewn that in place, then I'm going to shift the front yoke over and I'm going to sew the other side. Want to sew the yoke in place, starting at the dot and sewing all the way to the end. Then you just want to shift the yoke over to the opposite side and repeat that same step until you get to the dot. Go ahead and neaten the seam with a serger or your desired method. Now you want to place your front to your back with right sides facing and you're going to pin along the shoulder seam. Then you also want to pin along both side seams as well. Take your fabric to your sewing machine and sew along all of the pinned edges with 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, making sure to remove your pins as you go and also back stitching at the beginning and the end of your seams. Whenever you sew the shoulder seams, make sure that you're not catching the ruffle underneath. Now we're going to sew a 5/8 of an inch stitching guide along the lower edge of the front and back neckband piece. So you just want to sew a straight stitch 5/8 of an inch away from the raw outer edge. Before we attach our neckband, we also want to sew a stay stitch around the entire neckline of the bodice front and the bodice back. So just go ahead and sew a stitch 5/8 of an inch away from the raw edge. This is just going to help make sure that our neckline does not stretch out too much as we're sewing it. Now you want to take your neckband piece and you're going to press along that stitching line that you made to the wrong side. Now you want to pin your neckband to your neckline, matching the seams and also making sure that the outer edge of the neckband extends 5/8 of an inch away from the keyhole opening. Go ahead and take that fabric to your sewing machine and you're going to sew along the neckline with 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Next, I'm going to fold the neckband onto itself with right sides facing and the seam allowance facing up. Then I'm just going to sew using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now you just want to continue trimming the seam allowance of the collar and the neckline. Now you just want to turn that neckband to the inside and we're going to pin that in place all the way around. So go ahead and just press the facing down towards the wrong side and evenly pin that in place. Once you have the neckband evenly pinned in place, go ahead and take that to your sewing machine and I'm going to baste that in place. So a basting stitch is just a long temporary stitch on your sewing machine. Now that I've basted that neckband in place, I'm going to turn the fabric with the right sides facing up and I'm going to top stitch along my basting line. So go ahead and just top stitch right on top of that basting line that you previously made. Once you've top stitched your neckband in place, you can just use your seam ripper to take out those temporary basting stitches. Now we're going to move on to our sleeve. So go ahead and grab your sleeve piece and you want to turn that onto itself with right sides facing and you're going to pin along that underarm seam. Repeat that to your remaining sleeve as well. Go ahead and take your sleeves to your sewing machine and you're going to sew along the underarm seam with 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Again, making sure to remove those pins as you go and also backstitch at the beginning and the end of your seam. Once you finish sewing that, go ahead and neaten the seam with a serger or your desired method. Now we're going to bring in our 1/2 inch single fold bias tape, and to form the casing on the sleeve and on the waist seam, we're going to just center the bias tape over the placement line that you should have transferred from your pattern piece. So go ahead and just center that bias tape over that placement line and you just want to pin that bias tape in place. Go ahead and repeat that same exact step step to the waistline of your bodice. So you just want to center that bias tape over that placement line that you should have transferred from your pattern piece. And you want to make sure that you do that all the way around and you're working on one layer of the shirt. So you don't want to pin the bias tape throughout both layers. Now we can take our sleeve and our bodice to our sewing machine and we're going to sew the bias tape in place. So you just want to turn in the ends of the bias tape so that you have a nice clean finish at the opening seam of the sleeve. Then you just want to go ahead and sew along the bias tape side, and then you're going to repeat that and sew along the other side of the bias tape as well. So there will be a small opening at the side seam of the sleeve. This is going to be where you insert your elastic. So again, whenever you get to the side seam of the sleeve, you want to turn the ends of the bias tape under just to make a neat finish at that elastic casing opening on the bias tape. Once you've attached the bias tape to both sleeves and also to your waistline of your bodice, you want to insert the 1/4 of an inch elastic into your sleeve. Go ahead and cut the elastic using your elbow measurement plus 1 inch, and you want to insert that into the casing on your sleeve. So go ahead and just grab a safety pin or a bodkin tool and insert your elastic through that small opening at the seam. Once you get both elastic ends out, just go ahead and pin that in place. Repeat that step to your remaining sleeve and also to the bodice waistline. For the bodice waistline elastic, you want to use your waist measurement plus 1 inch. Once you've inserted your casing, go ahead and just take that to your sewing machine, and you want to sew the elastic ends in place using a zigzag stitch. Go ahead and repeat that to both sleeves and also to your waist casing. Once you have that in place, go ahead and just sew a slip stitch to close that elastic casing opening. Now you want to go ahead and sew the narrow hem on the sleeve. To do that, I'm just going to turn my serged edge to the inside, and then I'm just going to fold that again onto itself and sew very close to the turned in edge. You can pin this in place first, or you can go ahead and just fold that serged edge over as you go. Now it's time to attach our sleeve. So you just want to place your sleeve with the right sides facing out into your bodice with the wrong sides facing out. So the right side of the sleeve is matching the right side of the bodice. You just want to pin at that underarm seam, and then you just want to go ahead and pin the sleeve evenly throughout the armhole, matching those notches on the sleeve and the notches on the bodice armhole. Go ahead and repeat that step to your remaining sleeve and your remaining armhole. Now you want to sew your sleeves in place with 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, starting at that underarm seam, and then again making sure to remove your pins as you go and backstitch at the beginning and the end of your seam. Go ahead and repeat that to your remaining sleeve and your remaining armhole, and then once you're done sewing your seams, go ahead and neaten it with a serger or your desired method. Alright you guys, once you have finished sewing your sleeves in place, go ahead and just turn your shirt with the right sides facing out. This is my favorite part of the sewing process, when you get to see your finished product. But we do have one more step that we need to do, and we need to attach our button to the back, and also we need to sew a button thread loop at that keyhole opening on the back as well. So to do this, you want to sew a few secured stitches at that keyhole opening on one side, and then you want to form a loop with one hand, and then you just want to pass the thread through the loop, repeating that process over and over until you have enough thread to go around your button. Once you have enough thread, you just want to pass the needle through the end of that thread chain to secure the end in place. And then you just want to sew a few secured stitches to the opposite side, creating a little loop for your button. Once you finish sewing your thread chain loop for your button, you just want to sew your button to the other side. Once you finish sewing your loop and your button, you're all done with McCall's 7977. I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Thank you so much for sewing along with me and also subscribing to my channel. Make sure you stick around to the end where I'll insert more photos of me wearing this top. Alright you guys, you're all done sewing McCall's 7977. If you'd like to see more of these videos, make sure you hit like and subscribe, and also comment below. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you can be notified every time I release a new video. I really hope you enjoyed making this pattern with me, and hopefully you learned something new in today's video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next one. Bye guys!